Hey Tim, what are we doing today?
We are in South London at the on the Bermondsey Beer Mile at the moment at the Barrel Project, which is part of London Beer Factory. London Beer Factory, some of you may know because they sell to high street retailers like Tesco. This is basically their skunk works here, their Willy Wonka area where they develop stuff. And we're going to go in and meet Ed, one of the founders, and his Jedi Master who does the brewing as well. And we're looking forward to it.
Let's get stuck in. So here we are, we're inside the Barrel Project and we have Ed Cotton with us here.
Very nice to see you guys.
Ed is founder and director.
Yeah, founder and sales director of the London Beer Factory. So, I mean, yeah, started it 7 years ago. My brother Sim.
You've achieved a lot in 7 years. I mean, look. Yeah.
I mean,
incredible.
From where we came from right at the beginning to where we are now, I mean, yeah, a lot has changed. A lot has changed in the industry. A lot has changed with what we brew, what we produce. I mean, yeah, it's like a lifetime, you know, to think what we were brewing 7 years ago to what we're brewing now. To think what everybody was brewing 7 years ago. To think beer wasn't even in a can 7 years ago. I mean, it is just incredible. You know, now beers are being sold in 440 cans. You know, heavily hopped IPAs, heavily hopped double IPAs. I mean, every type of beer under the sun. You know,
it's incredible. No, well done. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Am I right in thinking that there's two distinct arms to what you do? You've got the sort of commercial side where you sell through mainstream retailers like Tesco. You said. I mean, this one I've got here, Jungle Trip, is available in Tesco.
So yes, there are two aspects to the brewery. One is, I suppose, what I hear that is the barrel aging of beer, which is the real art form, and then the other side,
Willy Wonka side.
The Willy Wonka side. The other side is the commercial side, which is, as you say, we sell Jungle Trip in Tesco's, along with Hazy Days, Zia. Zia is an imperial stout. Who would have thought Tesco would be selling
9.2%.
I mean, who would have said? I mean, nobody would have said that 5 years ago. And I just think the plethora of different beers that are produced is amazing. So we sell 5 different beers in Tesco. Blood orange and cranberry sour. Yeah, it's
in Tesco. Haven't tried that yet. It's next on my list.
So that's a kettle sour,
yeah.
And then obviously we sell to restaurants, pubs, bars, bottle shops. So obviously, kind of the day to day is obviously deciding what type of beers are going to be produced for the following month or the following 6 months. Come up with those recipes, recipe development, branding, PR, presenting to Tesco, future beers, or whichever supermarket it might be. Meeting pub customers, restaurant customers. Yeah, I mean, brewing has got everything. Marketing, PR, production. You name
What's
it.
the balance of sales and marketing versus?
Well, I'd say 80%. 80% sales, 80-20. 20% product, 80% sales and marketing.
But for the brewer, it'd be the other way around.
Of course, always is.
When trying to move away from the business side to the brewing side, how did you conceive the idea of the Barrel Project? Because you said you've been going for 7 years.
So I studied wine at university, but personally,
that's a good course to do.
That is probably. I mean, a lot of people studied wine at university, of course. But I actually studied wine at university. Down at Brighton, which is the only place in the UK you can do it. So the Barrel Project came about simply because there just weren't many people in the UK doing it. We'd seen over in the US there's a huge market for it, and we just thought, I mean, why not? I mean, London needs these type of places, and why not try and produce it? It's a little bit different to your funky IPA. You know, I mean, although obviously
This is a lovely funky IPA.
it
by
is
the
a
way.
lovely funky IPA, but you know,
Jungle Trip, New
there are
England Pale Ale.
so many varieties of beers out there. I mean, even more so than wine, one would argue.
Yeah.
You know, there's just so much you can do. So we now do cans and kegs. I mean, we're producing each week about 30 to 50,000 litres a week, which sounds like a lot. I mean, you know, it is in the great scheme of things, and you know, packaging probably 25 to 30, 40 pallets a week of cans.
Wow.
Bear in mind, each pallet will have 2,500 cans on it.
What's your staffing level at the moment then?
So we've got about 25 staff.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Do you can on site, or do you get a company in to can?
No, can on site.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very important
Wow.
because quality control.
Yeah.
So we can manage everything from production, brewing, canning, and then obviously out the door delivery. So we have the whole process.
Yeah.
And obviously beer in general, but especially these type of beers are best drunk fresh.
Yeah.
And that's when you really get the hop profile coming through. So yeah, I mean, most of our beer is super fresh.
Yeah.
So it's been a hell of a journey.
Yeah,
And obviously the last 18 months have been horrific,
Right.
as I know it has been for most people. But you know, you've just got to crack on. It gives us an opportunity to work out what beers we want to be producing over the next 2 years. Kind of look at our business, see what we can do to change it. Is there anything we can do different? You know, what can we bring into the business? What other areas can we look at? You know, all that type of good stuff.
So I'm right in thinking that it was your brother Sim. He was the brewer.
He's the brewer. Yeah, I'm the
You're the businessman.
I'm the salesman. You know.
Right.
Do you ever try to handle the brewing side of things, or?
Well, gave it a go, you know,
Yeah.
and some mixed results. So leave it to the professionals, you know. But yeah, you know, it's good to know what you know what you're good at, you know. And
Has it panned out how you thought it would?
that's a very good question. The short answer is no.
Right.
You know, long answer is, I think ultimately craft beer especially, is such a fast-moving area that you just got to be adaptable. Things are changing so quick, and thankfully we're nimble enough to be able to be at the forefront of that. You know, so with like the Barrel project, I mean, we've got this up and running in about 6 months,
Right.
And obviously then it takes time to produce the beers that we're producing, but you know, I think that is so important. You know, and play to your strengths.
Your advice to anyone who's currently where you were 8 years ago, thinking, should we start a brewery? That seems like a good idea. What's your advice?
My advice would be go for it, but keep it small. Keep it small. Go in for the niche area, and I think you do very well. You know.
Cool, so I'm Brayden. I'm the barrel manager down here at the Barrel Project.
So was the barrel master?
Well, I mean, depends. If I'm talking to prospective dates, it's the barrel master. If I'm talking to people I'm trying to impress, I'll pick it up a little bit more. But,
Works on me.
Yeah. So we are the sour and barrel aging wing of London Beer Factory. Our main brewery is a little bit further down in Gypsy Hill. We operate almost entirely in Bermondsey. So we brew our beer at a neighbouring brewery just around the corner, let ourselves in. They kind of brew on the weekends, leave midweek for us. So we'll brew, come in, make the beer down the road. We run it off into these big tanks here behind you, bring them back on the back of our pickup truck. Gravity feed them with a forklift into a couple of our fermenters over there. And then after about a 10-day primary fermentation in stainless steel, we'll take the yeast off the bottom. We work with, one of the most interesting things about what we do here is we work with native wild yeast that I caught when I came to the country about 2 years ago. So we have a house culture of yeast and bacteria that is purely identifiable to this place. No one else has anything same, and we use that every time we make a beer. And we'll recycle that off the bottom of a tank, keep it in cold storage for a week or two until we brew again, and then we'll use it again. That beer, after the first kind of 10 to 12 days, we move up into barrels. As you can see, we have about 170 kicking on at the moment that are mostly full, which is pretty exciting. Gives us
All these are mostly full.
Yeah, I think there's about 10 currently that are being prepped.
That's a lot of beer.
It is. It's kind of like, I think it's about 34,000 litres of beer sitting around at the moment.
Where have the barrels come from?
So these are all mostly ex-Bordeaux white and red wine barrels that were sent back to a kind of barrel sourcing company who like tightened them up, recharged some of them on the insides, basically just did a little bit of maintenance for them, and then we purchased them through that.
For those who don't know, these barrels, they get toasted inside, don't they, for like 90 seconds or...
Yeah, typically, depending on what you're using them for. So if you're making bourbon or whiskey, typically they'll get a more substantial char on the inside.
Right.
Wine is a little bit less so, because they're not looking for any of that acrid kind of stringency coming through from the char. So these are all pretty lightly charred. We also will kind of rinse them, clean them, steam them before we use them, just to remove any excess.
In a
flavor.
nutshell, what are the benefits of barrel aging beer?
So, as you can see, these are quite small. So we have 170 individual fermenters or maturation vessels. So instead of making a 2,000 litre batch of beer, I can split that batch up into 8 different barrels that will then go on their own journey. They all kind of work out a little bit differently. Some will have more acid, some will have less, some will have more oxidation, some will have less. And that kind of like, we mature all of this beer in barrel for somewhere between typically 10 months and up to like over 3 years.
Okay.
So over that process, these things develop individually. And that gives us a really large platform to then blend beer back together. So we end up with a more complex product, and a more interesting beer.
I suppose it could be unique to that barrel as well, in terms of the...
It does, yeah. So we'll do some single barrel stuff that'll be unique to that barrel. We get to know them pretty well because over time you can track how they perform. So typically beer that has healthy kind of microorganisms of yeast and bacteria inside of it. Sometimes that barrel will be ready quicker, sometimes they'll take a little bit longer. But yeah, over time we kind of get to know them a little bit more personally.
You've become very friendly with them, haven't you?
Yeah, some of them less friendly, and they require a little bit more attention. There's a few of them that had to be like pulled apart, substantially cleaned, and then brought back together, which is always a pain in the ass. But yeah, some of them don't behave.
I'm amazed you can keep them in barrel for up to 3 years. I'm amazed you're that patient.
They work hard, absolutely.
I bet.
Yeah, I mean, like it's one of those things that sometimes we'll use it early, sometimes we'll use it later, but when you're waiting around for this long, you want to make sure you do it right. You don't want to jump the gun, otherwise you've wasted 12 months already.
In terms of the flavour that the barrels impart, there's not too much, is there?
So we try and limit that. So we'll try and limit the overall oak and woodiness that comes in because they're spending such a long time in there. So that's where the steaming and the cleaning comes into it. It's also where sourcing these barrels from Bordeaux that have already been used for housing white wine in them previously. That will remove a lot of that character already.
So they're all from Bordeaux?
Yes.
All from Bordeaux.
Yeah, so we try and limit that. You will pick up some over time anyway, but then we can address that when we get to blending as well, kind of limit how much actually ends up in the finished product. But yeah, overall we're mostly looking for a slightly breathable fermenter or maturation vessel. So that oxidation over the course of those years ends up giving us the end product we want, ends up giving us kind of, it lets the yeast do its job a little bit better.
So each of these barrels holds what, 250 litres?
So about 225.
225.
So it gives you a decent amount of bottles for them.
Yeah. I mean, like we're pretty good. Everything happens from brewing to packaging either at this site or just down the road. So we're obviously a pretty small operation in comparison to our main brewery. But we'll be bottling tomorrow actually.
You can focus on getting it right, I suppose, though. If you
I mean,
small scale.
If I can handle everything from point A to point Z over the course of 3 years, it makes things a little bit easier to control the end product.
I want to get a barrel now. The closest.
We do.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, like we are constantly getting to the end of some of the usefulness of barrels.
Let me know.
But yeah, if we ever have it come up, we'll definitely let you know.
The closest I've come is oak chips soaked in bourbon. That's all I've done so far.
That's definitely how I started when I first started my own brewing. So I mean, it's good if you want to impart that oak character to it. Definitely. But
You guys you're not doing bourbon barrels at the moment, are you? Strictly
we don't
wine?
have anything because we find that extra char is not really ideal to what we're looking for. Also, wineries tend to turn over barrels a little bit more quickly, whereas distilleries, specifically like whiskey, will hang on to them for a lot longer. So we find that by the time they're ready to part with them, they're parting with them because they're no longer holding liquid, or they're a little bit too old for the uses that we're kind of looking for. So yeah, wineries typically, the way we operate is very similar to a winery and how we use them. So kind of it just lines up the usefulness.
Yeah. The number one beer on the Brew Bros Hall of Fame at the moment is Speedway Stout, the barrel aged one, which is aged in bourbon barrels, and that knocked our socks off.
Yeah. That was probably the first.
We tried both of them at the same time, the straight and the barrel aged one. Yeah, the barrel aged one was just.
That's a dangerous little tasting.
It was
Alesmith makes some incredible stouts. I've definitely had a few speedways over the course of my.
So do you
tasting correct?
Yeah. So you use these kind of barrels then, as opposed to like the bourbon oak barrels, because it's a slightly more subtle.
Slightly more subtle.
You introduce this bit, then you'll.
I was hoping you never get to say that.
It gives a good understanding as to why.
On top of the char, bourbon specifically, the way they make bourbon is they can only use the barrels once and then they move it on. So you find you get a lot more oak character out of that. So if we were to put the beer that we're making into a bourbon barrel, typically that would be overpoweringly oaky within 3 to 6 months. So before our yeast is ready for packaging, the beer would already be too woody.
So for a stout, it obviously works well.
Yeah, but it works well. Yeah, when you got a darker malt bill to work with, it's definitely a lot better for the beer.
When it's punching around 11-12%.
Yeah, absolutely. When you got something to kind of like, you've got more interesting flavors, more bold flavors to kind of round out that oak character.
Yeah.
But so the other thing we do after we've matured the beer in barrel for a long time, and before we package it, is we play around with a lot of local fruit, and this year a lot of wine grapes and wine varietals. So we take usually from a local winery or from a local fruit farm. We'll pick up a couple 100 kilos of whatever they've got in season, bring it back here, process it. Got a few fruit tanks down the end that we use specifically for this process.
There's fruit behind the camera over there as well.
Yeah, there is one over there.
There is just sitting there.
Yeah, and then once we've secured the fruit and got it ready, we'll blend some beer together, find some flavors that we kind of think go well with that particular fruit. Put the beer on top of the fruit for a period of kind of 2 to 3 months until we're happy with it. Let it carbonically macerate, so start to ferment, and the CO2 will help break up the fruit. Macerate that fruit around until we get the flavor we're looking for, and then we'll pull it off the fruit and package it later on down the line.
I had a question about fruit. I've been really keen to ask because I like fruity beers.
Cool.
I did a mango video a few weeks ago, which was I basically played around puree juice, dried mango, etc. When you get into commercial brewing, it's basically the same thing. So you are buying fruit in. Do you do the preparation yourselves? I mean, are you there dicing or pureeing, or are you?
We do all the preparation here ourselves.
You do?
So at our main brewery, we do a few more kettle sour, quick turnover beers, and for those, you can purchase commercial quantities of purees, already processed and pasteurized fruits.
And I guess you get them delivered, and because you're doing quantity.
Yeah, they come in essentially like 25 litre drums, and you just go in. But because we're already taking our time and trying to kind of get the best possible character out of the beer over the course of 2 to 3 years here, we don't have any problem spending that little bit of extra time manually processing the fruit and letting it sit for kind of 3 months to kind of get that maceration process on its own. I find I've worked in both sides of that brewery, in that quick turnover fruit beer and the long turnover stuff, and I find definitely over time when you use local fruit, you give it the time it needs and kind of process it manually, you definitely get a more interesting, complex product.
Oh, I heard on a podcast that you sometimes when fruiting beers, you're using as much as 200 to 300 grams per litre.
Yeah.
That's a lot of fruit.
It's a lot of fruit.
What happens when it's done? It just...
That's where Ed comes into it.
You throw it at local breweries.
Pulls his wallet out and pays for the 300 kilos of fruit that comes in. But yeah, typically...
Thanks, Brayden. Yeah.
So we have... our fruiting tanks are approximately 1,000 litres. So we'll go 250, 300 kilos of fruit and then top that up with remaining beer. So typically, depending on what we're looking to do, somewhere between 200 grams and 350, I think is probably grams per litre is the highest we've gone for.
I guess it varies depending on the fruit and how much.
It is, yeah. So when you're working with berries, usually you need less of a fruiting rate or a slightly lower fruiting rate because they just break down to nothing. And you get a lot more extraction out of it.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're dealing with peaches, nectarines, big stone fruit, stuff that's a little bit more difficult, a little bit more tough, going higher on the fruit rate helps you get to that flavour a little bit quicker. But,
Excellent.
Done this before.
what we have here is, as I was talking about before, with the fruited beers that we've been making. This one is a beer we made. It's blonde-based beer that was aged in barrel for about 12 months, and then we put that on top of some freshly picked Kent Chardonnay, and let that ferment / macerate for a further 3 months, and then we moved it off to packaging from that point as well.
Right.
So it's a fruit beer, but it ends up tasting somewhere closer to a wine beer. Or a fruit wine hybrid. But yeah, it's one of the.
It's using the Chardonnay. Is that right?
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
So we use whole fruit for this. We leave stems on, so we don't pick or process any of that, because we find we get a little bit of woodiness that we like, as well as kind of like a green kind of floral note that comes through from the stems as well.
Go on, I'm sorry, I missed. What was the fruit?
Chardonnay.
Oh,
great.
see, right, I'm with you.
Chardonnay.
Yes.
A great beer.
Yeah.
You can smell it.
One for the boss. The cameraman.
But he's the boss until he calls Carlton.
Yeah.
So it smells like a wild ale.
It is. So our yeast is wild. It's made up of wild yeast and wild bacteria. So we harvested it off fresh fruit and off grapes and off flowers throughout kind of Greater London area.
Okay.
And then grew those whatever yeast and bacteria was living on it up in our lab, and then turned it into something we could make beer with.
So you're very much about all the local thing then. That's your.
Yeah, I think if you can use the products within a couple of 100 miles of yourself, you should definitely work with that.
Yeah.
Helps out kind of.
I heard about the Bermondsey bees, for example.
For sure, definitely. We make a beer to meal, so a honey beer with, we start with our wild yeast, and then we add a good chunk of Bermondsey bees honey from B Street Bees down Bermondsey Street. So we make that, let it age out in barrel, and then we use another chunk of that honey to carbonate it in bottle when we're ready to release it. So try and use as much local produce as we possibly can.
Yeah, excellent.
Cheers, lads.
Let's get in there. Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Cheers. Yeah, thank you.
Guys, thank you.
And thanks for all the info.
You as well.
Yeah, no problem.
What about the beer?
We can cut that.
I've gone in. Cool. That is lovely.
Thank you, yeah. It's
I mean, it's very fresh, isn't it?
It reminds me of like Australian buttery kind of Chardonnays. There is like a woody element to it as well, but yeah.
It's very slightly sweeter than the ones that we've had, because we've done a few tastings of wild ales. We did one by Billwood's Brewery, it was a Canadian brewer, I think.
Yeah.
That wasn't right up our street. That was really earthy and sort of minerally, and I just wasn't. Yeah, this is lovely.
I'm glad you like it. Yeah, I mean, like the joy of wild beer is it's exactly that. When you're a wild brewery in Canada, you're dealing with different microorganisms, so some of them are gonna eat a lot more of that sugar. Our culture, we find, finishes a little higher, but it's overall pretty stable.
What is the ABV on this?
Ooh, this one is.
Let's have a guess.
Have a guess. What do you think?
It's difficult. I mean,
it's
a 9?
8.8. Yeah. When you're making fruit beers, obviously you get so much
7.
extra sugar from the fruit.
Yeah.
So it tops off. Our base beer is typically somewhere between 5 to 6.5 kind of percent ABV.
And that just kind of dries it out that a little bit more. Doesn't
Well, yeah. I mean, like you get another fermentation, which will then dry it out a little bit further. But then also there's so much fructose and sucrose within those wine grapes that you just get an extra boost in ABV, which is
that is
What are you getting
really,
on the,
really
what are you
good.
getting on the nose?
On the nose, you can definitely get the
beautiful Chardonnay.
Definitely get the
fresh.
grape.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I mean, I just put the stuff together. The real kind of like hard work goes to the places that are actually growing the fruit and the produce that come into it. But yeah.
How long did this one spend in barrel for?
So this one had an average age of barrels. So some were a little bit younger, some were a little bit older, but it was average age about 13 months. And then 3 months on the fruit, and then another 3 months to naturally condition and mature in bottle as well. So
It's basically like classic Chardonnay. It's sort of quite lemony, sort of, and because you barrel aged it as well.
It's kind of zesty.
Yeah.
It's got a bit of,
definitely. I get a little bit of green apple to it typically. More English grown Chardonnay I find is a little bit more appley, just due to it gets picked a little bit earlier. But yeah,
I mean, it's an
Mine's
English
slipped down
sparkling
pretty easy.
wine.
for an 8.8% beer, and through
perfect on a day like this. Isn't it?
it's
the warmest day so far this year, is it?
Yeah, it's 32 degrees in London town.
What I think is there's like with these type of beers is there's real skill in this. With stouts, I'm not saying there isn't a skill with stouts, but definitely more with this.
I can
Because obviously
see
you
that,
can put the stout in a whatever kind of barrel. You know, it's going to impart that flavour. With this, you're actually trying to get the flavour from the grapes, the juice, whatever, and the barrel and the beer.
Yeah.
Part of it, I think, as well is when you're making like aging and barrel aging an imperial stout or whatever. You're starting with a product you know is very tasty to begin with.
Exactly.
You're putting it in that to then boost it, and you're putting it in there for a short period of time to then boost that flavour. Whereas when you're making stuff like this, we're using wild yeast from the very beginning. So there's so many, and there's in that culture we don't have a single strain. We have hundreds of thousands of different strains of yeast within it. So the variability goes up, and then there's so many things that can go wrong between there and 3 years down the line. So it's
That's
less
the
skill and more knowing when to step in and turn the key in the right direction. But yeah. Cool.
Hey Brayden, when did you first get into home brewing?
So I got into beer back in 2013.
Okay.
Went to Germany, kind of got outside of just drinking mass-produced lagers, had a Schlenkerla Rauch beer, and was like, okay, there's a little bit more to beer here. Came back, worked in beer bars for a little bit, managed a couple of beer bars for a little while. During that process, I met a few brewers, and they informed me it was possible to make this stuff at home if you knew the right skills. So yeah, I took advantage of my girlfriend at the time was on a university trip to Greece, and I had a month to myself. So I decided to build my own 3-vessel homebrew kit, and then started making beer at uni just to kind of subsidize the cost of buying alcohol. And then
Did that work out for you?
It did, worked out very well
okay.
for myself and for my younger brother.
So that was my plan, but I just found I've just spent more and more money on the equipment.
Well, I mean, as you can tell, I've now vastly spent more money on beer. Beer is, like any hobby, is a hole to throw money. But it's a fun one.
Definitely.
So yeah, I started making beer at home, and then like any good home brewer, just annoyed enough professional brewers with samples and free stock to kind of whiz my way in. And then eventually, I think I was 20 or 21, came across a guy who was looking for an assistant brewer's role, and liked my beer, and we kind of hit it off pretty well. And then
And where was that? Sorry, still
that was
in Germany,
that was in Sydney. So back in my home country. I was running a bar in Sydney for a little bit, like a craft beer bar in Sydney called Bit a Few, which is quite fun. And then started working part-time in a brewery just to top it up. And then kind of went permanent with those guys not long down the line, and then ended up over here.
Was that always your plan to move into brewing, or I mean, I'm guessing it's
from the minute I had my first interesting beer, so something outside of a mass-produced lager, I kind of knew I wanted to work in the industry, and then the further I understood the industry, I knew I wanted to be producing it. I remember calling my dad the first day I got was told that I'd be coming in to brew my own beer at the brewery that had brought me on, and I was absolutely stoked. And still, I mean, it's an industry where it ties arts, creativity, and manual labour together, and those have always been things that I've kind of been interested in. So it's a good blend. I'm still having as much fun today as I kind of was back in the start, which is always a good sign.
When was the last time you had one of those kind of macro mass-produced beers?
Oh, quite regularly. I mean, when especially with this kind of stuff, you're making pretty bold, pretty flavorful beers. It's really nice to sit down at the end of the day and have not necessarily a mass-produced conglomerate beer, but a nice, well-made German lager is definitely the way to go. Brilliant. It's not something you have to think about too much. You can kind of switch off and just enjoy the simplicity of the hard work the brewers have already put into it.
Sounds perfect. Brilliant.
Awesome.
Thank you.
No problem.
So we've had a good look around, we've had a good chat, we've tasted some incredible beers, but the question our viewers really want to know is, what do you bench?
More than you, Tim.
Whoa. So on that note, I think we'll sign off and say thanks so much, Ed. Thanks for having us.
Cheers, Tim.
It's great to see you.
Pleasure.
And
cheers,
good luck with everything you do.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah, cheers,
And,
guys. Thanks for coming down.
We'll be back again soon.
Can't wait.